Hello there, and welcome to episode 2 of my tutorial series for beginners in EU5. Today, we are going to take in this episode a dive into the basics of economy. I did glance over this topic in the first episode. Today, I want to give you a proper understanding where the money comes from, where it goes, and how you can manipulate it to go into your pocket. Because once you have understood how the whole economy chain works, it becomes a lot easier to just generate a lot of money with the stuff that you got. So, first up, we generate money out of various sources. One source is taxation. When we look here into the balance ledger, we see the taxes that we take from all of our estates. These people generate those taxes by working in cities or countries in their regarding jobs. This is true for people in RGOs, for people in all these buildings here in towns, or in rural areas where you have villages or stuff like that rolling. Everybody there works there, earns their money, and from that we earn taxation. This taxation is being reduced by the amount of negative control. Take this as robbery and crime and everything. Actually, the negative stuff does impact rebellions because they do steal the money from you. In short, the more control we have over an area, the more of the actually taxable income lands in our ledgers. Control is increased by building roads and by building jurisdictional buildings like guard buildings and many other things. All in all, we want to generate as many taxes as possible. Most of the time, towns and cities will produce most of the taxes, while the rural areas will more or less produce the building materials, because we're going to go now into the next topic, because taxes is pretty much done with that. I will go back here and there, but there's not that much more to say about that. Much more important is now the production and consumption of things. So let's head on over to the production tab, and I want to go here to the goods, and here we see all of the items that are currently produced in the market that we look at. In this case, the Bruggen market, which we are part of. If your empire is larger than that, it becomes a little bit more complicated, but luckily we are in a beginner series. Jokes aside. The most important thing is to sort, for me personally at least, is to sort the things by goods balance. So now we see the green items are produced in higher numbers than people are requesting it. So this market has a lot more wool than it needs. What this does is it impacts the price negatively, because if there's a big surplus, things aren't as costly as if it is the other way around. If we now go the list down to the bottom, we see the goods that are in high demand, because it's a negative balance here. You see the supply is much lower than the demand. This is where prices go high. This is where you can turn your profit. These are the things that you actually want to invest your economy into, because that is the lucrative stuff. Investing into the things up there is the less lucrative stuff. Luckily, you don't really need to analyze the market like that. I just want to show you so you understand how these numbers here come together. Because these profits that you see behind each building are directly linked to the prices, the supply and the demand of the market. So currently, the Spinners Guild turns a high profit because there is a high demand for the cloth that they are producing. So you can just also click in here and look at the markets. And you see here on our local market, there is still a higher balance than demand, but it still turns profit. So this way you can look at these things. To give you a more impressive example on the other end, where is it here? The Paradox Games at their best here. The Tailors Guild, they produce the fine cloth, and this is where we have a really high demand of in the market. There we go. These guys turn a much higher profit than the smaller building. Mind you, though, if you'd be now building tailors guilds everywhere on your cities, you would start to influence the market with your production there, so prices would slowly slither down. Diversification is key. In this game, I personally find that due to the fact that how things work, we want to have a lot of production lines because it's just like best like that. But here's another trick that, or another thing that we need to take into account. We not only produce demands by putting an item into one industry to create another item. So Tailor's Guild, for example, takes silk and turns out fine cloth. There's also another way of destroying goods or consuming them, and that is via people. So if we look into our society tab and we look into the area here, we can check out what the people, the peasants in Rotterdam, like to have. And here you have the full consumption of things that will just disappear because the people will use it up. These are the things that turn a regular profit. These are the goods that people want. Mind you also that people of higher standing demand other things. So the citizens of the town here require fine cloth, jewelry, and much more extravagant things than the peasants, which don't need that much of a high class thing. This also means that when your society develops into higher standards, also the hunger for better items will grow. Soldiers also need a different set of items than clerics, and also clerics need other items than nobles. So altogether, the composition of people that live in a market makes up the hunger for items. This is one draw of items, and the other draw of items are all the industries that convert one thing into another. Spinners Guild takes fiber crops and converts it into cloth. If you left-click these buildings, by the way, you often have different production methods at hand. The default setting of the game is that you have all the production methods automated. This is pretty recommendable because most of the time the game's AI will try to find the most lucrative path that is available. Sometimes it jumbles up, especially with very small markets, so this is something worth noting. Most buildings and most industries have different recipes, but not all of them have. Also, one last thing before we go into the next chapter of this video, it is worth noting that not only industry complexes consume goods, but also take the library for an example. The library will constantly consume books and paper and not produce anything except for the bonuses it here provides. There's lots of support buildings, if we want to call them like that have a steady consumption of items. This also creates income. Building a library finances the paper makers, the die makers, and the scriptoriums, because all of these produce books and everything around that. So this way you can set up an industry. This way you can set focuses on your industry. If you'd be building libraries everywhere, the whole paper industry would boom in your area. Take it like that. You have a lot of control about these things. So, I hope that by now you understand the dynamics of a market better. Mind you that when we look at the Brugge market, that I said Brugge market. Jeez, sometimes I still have a little bit of a problem in finding here. This is the area that we're talking about. All the countries that live in this area here can take excess on everything that is produced here without any extra efforts. This is one of the very few points where EU5 simplifies and doesn't take into account caravans that travel around. I don't know. Just take it like that. If something gets produced somewhere, it is automatically available in the whole market. And imagine that the trader will come to your town and sell it if it's being produced elsewhere. We can now, via trading, interact with the other markets, which are providing other productions and other things that we want to have. This we can influence via trade capacity. Trade capacity is generated into, or no, not into, oh, well, in different sizes of order. Let's call it like that. Towns and harbor areas are much better at generating trade volume than other areas. I already introduced in the previous video the marketplace, which is one of the strongest generators of trade capacity that you can have, in the early game that is. But there's also stuff like the fishing villages, which also generate at least a quarter of a marketplace. Consider that you can stack these a couple of times on top of one another. You can also generate maritime trade capacity. Just keep an eye out on all the buildings that generate trade capacity for you. But all in all, it falls pretty much everywhere to the verdict. If you want to produce a large amount of trade capacity, you will need at least a town. This is how it goes. But the thing is, trading is very, very valuable. With all the capacities we got, we can buy things that are elsewhere produced cheaper than at our place. We can also sell our own overproductions more expensively than in our own market, because it happens that where we produce it, prices aren't as good. The range of your trade endeavors is very much limited by your technological advance and many, many other things. So at the beginning of the game, you will be only able to interact with the markets in close proximity to you, but you will have plenty of options of technology and such things to expand your market reach. It's a little bit a topic in advance, but I wanted to put that up. When you are a beginner, like I assume when you're watching this, it is sufficient to say automate the trading and just build up all the trade capacity that you can. Here, one next thing that I want to talk about, workforce. All of the things that you build in your countries require workforce to run. The low quality buildings, so to speak, the stuff where the peasants work, often need a very high amount of workers. The market village takes 1,000 people to operate. So here in Leiden, 20,000 people sounds like a lot, but as a matter of fact, it's just 20 levels of basic commodities. Also, take into account that all of the regional gathering operations take 1,000 workers per level each, too. This is very important to pick up because here, like I said in the previous video, these are usually the most lucrative operations because you get a resource output without any resource input except for workers. All the other things that we have here have the necessity of putting one resource in to get a different resource out. There's almost no building that just produces something for just investing workforce. That's the real power of RGOs. They just crank out the stuff that you need. And it makes very much the difference between a booming industry and a attempt of dominating the market if you have the proper RGOs available. A very good example are the dyes of Den Haag. Dyes are pretty lengthy to produce in all other areas, and in this city we can just collect them basically for free. The profit per level here is really high for that part of the game, and to sum it up more quickly, when you have provinces, always look at their RGOs and their profit per level first, because this is the easiest way of generating money, because you just need to put 1,000 workers in and off you go. RGOs take their workforce from laborers. And here I want to explain how this here generally works. The lowest point is peasants. If you click into one stratum of workers, you always get the buildings that are linked to that. So in this area we have 19,000 peasants. If we'd be now building a market village, the 1,000 people necessary would be pretty much immediately employed, because we have 19,000 people looking for a place to work, because right now they'll be earning less money than what they do that there. If we'd be now building something that requires laborers here, all of these buildings also require 1,000 laborers, we'd have the problem that we have a net negative of 755 people because we want to fill up the RGO as well. People now will slowly travel upwards. This is a bottom. This is the bottom of the society, and they will slowly travel upwards. This is depending on your empire, your policies, how quickly it'll go. There's lots of things you can do. more about that at a different point when we're talking about inner politics. But in short, as long as there are people available in the country to migrate towards the necessary worker pool, it will happen eventually. The most easy setup areas are those where you have already the worker pool. So here, the market village would be operational in no time, whereas all the other buildings here would take a year or two to get into full gear. This is also something why RGOs often take some time to get going. Towns are now a little bit of a different point. So in towns, we still have also, as you see here, a very high peasant population, but we can't build villages there anymore. So that is one thing that's not happening here anymore. So let's compare towns to rural areas real quick. The biggest difference that I want to point out, and I feel like one of the most important difference, is a rural area gets to build way more levels of an RGO than a town. Once you upgrade an area into a town, the maximum amount of RGO levels is cut by half. So this is something you should be taking into account. When I was very new to the game, and one of my first runs was I was building a town in Leiden, and all of a sudden my whole country here started hungering because I cut myself off of my fish production. So that is one thing that's worth noting. But once you have a town, you will have more and more citizens available to work with. These guys are much more efficient than the low quality labor. When you look at the buildings here, the tannery does require only 200 people to get the job done. Also, town buildings often have a much higher efficiency when it comes down to resources used into resources converted. Take it like primitive tools versus more sophisticated tools. In short, in a town, you get much more power out of a single citizen over the course of the time compared to the rural areas. But on the other end, you will need the rural areas because now let's talk about one thing, and that is it's not all about profits. An economy also requires resources to run. If you look at all of these buildings that we want to construct, all of them do have a cost of setup. So everything you want to build, every little building does have certain materials that you need to invest to make that happen. Masonry, stone, lumber, glass, all these things, they don't turn out a high profit on the market. But these, if they are lacking, you will be not building anything. You will be also not producing anything, because most of the processes that turn out materials do require low quality materials. So not always look at the profit of an operation, but also look at the availability of materials when you look for an operation. So when we look at clay, for example, we notice that the clay in the Brugge market is pretty even. So it might be not turning a lot of money if we'd be now putting up a clay pit, but if we'd be now putting up industries that rely heavily on clay, these might be not working at full potential because there's not enough clay on the whole market. This is the moment when the profit of the clay pit will also go upwards. But with the knowledge that you have from looking at the markets, you can see these things before they happen. So all in all, what I'm trying to get down to is, if you want to set up a sophisticated industry of something more complicated than just tools or glass, let's say we want to set up weaponry or naval supplies, this is a good example. Check out if the necessary materials that are needed for this are available. You can also just check out the distributions here. Since we are operating in a market environment, usually, we can fill the blanks by trading it from other markets. But the best industries are those we can let operate from the stuff that is happening in our own native market, because there we don't need to pay the trade capacity to make it happen. Okay, so worker amounts are growing over the course of the time. I can only say one thing: population growth is such an important thing in this game. So everything you can do to make populations grow is usually worth it. Because we're in it for the centuries, you see. Which brings me to the last point I wanted to cover in this video, food. Food is the last pillar of economy that I want to cover. Usually, it is distributed like that. The towns and the cities get fed by the rural areas with food, and in return they crank out the sophisticated goods that the rural areas can't turn out. So this is the cycle that we need to go for, and each region, you see it here outlined by the gray border here, is ideally balanced with provincial food. When it comes down to food production, I have found that nothing beats RGOs. RGOs are just cranking out the most food, most uncomplicated. That's just how it is. If you can, keep the rural areas that have an RGO available that dishes out food. Don't build a town there. Just leave them like that. They are very, very valuable. Because even if a country is, for the moment, net positive, we want to grow these areas. When you look at this point here, look at that tiny green bar. This is how fully populated the area actually currently is. This means we can really do still a lot more. And this is why an overproduction of food is actually never a bad thing, because we want our country to develop, don't we? At the end of the day, also keep in mind, I mentioned that already in the previous video, overproductions of food will get sold. And as you see there, the Amsterdam region is making a little bit of a net profit of their sold food, and the other region is making a net negative. Usually, importing food is not a big deal on your order list. But we are talking here about the year 1338. Bad things happen, plagues happen, diseases happen, and if that does happen, market prices for food go up, and then your small amount for buying food can actually really, really be nasty for you. On the other hand, you can also turn a nice profit, because that's how things work. In short, try to get your food income mostly via RGOs. That's the easiest way to do it. There are plenty of other industries that you can set up to gather certain food items. My verdict here is, though, if you can't get the stuff going via an RGO and the need is there, and fruit is a good example. If you notice that your trade capacities get used for importing fruit, this is the point where you should consider setting up a couple of fruit orchards to produce the stuff by yourself, because you can't rely on the AI rulers to increase the RGO levels according to the demands of the market. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's a little bit of a random deal. It's just like that. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you do all these things, your net income will be positive, and then the last thing you need to do is try to connect everything with roads, build cities and towns where you see it fit, and let your empire grow. I will show you in the upcoming episodes the ways and means of inner politics that you can do to make your country grow even further. There we're talking about things like development and our cabinet and all those things. Maybe I will put the outer politics, to the diplomacy and everything into the same episode. We'll see about that. Let me know in the comment section what you'd like to see explained next, and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for watching. Drop me a like, drop me a subscribe, consider donating. I'd be really happy about all the help. This series is a lot of work. You wouldn't think that I've been pouring like 30 or 40 hours already into it. I love doing this. Anyways, thanks for all the support, and thanks for the time taken to watch this up until the very end, where you can hear my moaning and everything. Thanks for taking your time, and have a good day.